long day, I got a lot to say. It feels like I'm carrying a 2-ton weight. I go to see a friend.
Hello, I'm Msgr Patrick Winslow.
And I am Father Matthew Kauth.
And we are speaking from the Rooftop,
a podcast brought to you by 10 Books, in which we invite you to join our conversation out here in the open air,
where we look out upon the world around us from the rooftop of the church and share with you what we see.
Makes me wanna scream from the rooftop to the screen.
Good morning, Father Winslow.
Good morning. Back in the mid-90s, we started a conversation from the rooftop of a seminary.
In fact, what I recall is that we would have these incredible study sessions, being theology students at the time, and especially when we're preparing for exams, we would have topics, whether it's eschatology or the life of grace or moral theology or things of that nature. And then what often happened is when we finished the study for the particular exam, our conversation just kept going.
Yeah, well, probably because I needed more time to ruminate over the topics because I was lacking confidence in my ability to be able to perform on whatever exam we had. But there was also another motive. I wanted to know how this affected real life. This wasn't just academic.
And as happenstance had it, we just began to walk out onto this rooftop to continue our conversation because our brothers would go to sleep and we would just slip through this window that on this tower that we had in our seminary and bring a couple of lawn chairs and sit out there and talk. It was fresh air and you began to look at the world and say, what does all this mean? What do we make of it? So.
It was out of consideration for them, but I think there was a tiny bit of excitement of breaking the rules a little bit and climbing through windows and up ladders and reaching the parapet, if you will. But it was a beautiful scene. We looked out over the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, the Basilica there. It was lit up. The dome was lit up. It was Catholic University adjacent where all the campus could be seen in these beautiful old buildings. It created quite an atmosphere, and we could look out upon DC in different directions toward the Capitol Dome, toward the White House and Washington Monument, or directly in front of us was the shrine itself.
Mm-hmm. And I remember distinctly thinking to myself when we would finish preparing for exams that a certain kind of fear or trepidation began to grow in me because we realized we were going to be ordained soon. And what did the things that we learn have to do necessarily with the persons that we would one day serve? And so wanting to be able to apply the theology as opposed to just sort of memorize the theology, certainly it had great impact in our own life relative to our spiritual life, etc. But were we going to be able and adequate to be able to explain this to persons and to be able to have the faith be something that would actually engender in them discipleship?
In a certain sense, the setting, without us knowing at the time, was perfect for this disposition because we were looking out. We were looking out at the world. We were looking out at the people. We were looking out upon the things that were going on at the time. And we were trying to see it all in the light of faith. And of course, we were focused on our own vocations and our own particular paths, as that's what we're supposed to do in the seminary, is try to figure out what God is doing in our own life so that we can serve him in the church and the people in the church. But at the same time, we started discussing matters that were even beyond our own particular path, starting to look at the bigger picture and what was going on around us.
Absolutely. I remember, too, that what usually happened in terms of winding the conversation down is that we would climb as high as we could, not on the roof. We were already as high as we could on the roof, but we would begin to climb as best we could with our minds to see how far we could go on a particular topic and to penetrate the reality as acutely as we could. And at some point, we just sort of stopped and would look at the thing, almost in a sort of stupor or marveling at something in a kind of wonder, with the realization that we didn't have any more handholds. We couldn't actually climb any further. And so it would end in a sort of silent gaze, as it were, and then we would just kind of peel off and go to bed. Sometimes, to my chagrin, way too late for me. I'm not a late night guy. I'm an early riser, and so sometimes it was detrimental for the next day. But nevertheless, I never found it to be lacking in great worth.
Yes, well, I mean, it wasn't that hard to get you to stay a little longer. It was pretty easy, actually. But, I mean, we not only had some really great ideas, some illuminated ideas, some ideas that have carried with us throughout well over 20 years now, such that we can even say that we've been having the same conversation for 20 plus years.
That's right.
We had really dumb ideas too. So not the least of which was the time I saw this antenna, this like big bulky antenna. Back then we didn't have any sort of internet or anything, cable in the seminary, but you could have a television. So I had a small TV in my room, and I decided I'm going to hook that antenna up to my TV. So I remember I dropped the wire from the antenna down to my television, plugged it into the TV, never once considering the fact that I had just hooked up a lightning rod directly into my bedroom.
It was safer to be on the rooftop.
It was colossally stupid. But on the world of ideas and the world of exploring, I mean, we learned a lot, and we've been able to explore the depths of things. And even though we reached certain points where we thought we couldn't go too much farther, we knew that at some point we'd be able to return to those paths and discuss them even further. And I think that you and I, over the arc of time, started to realize how differently we would approach topics. And we really appreciated that because the angle at which you were coming was slightly different than the angle, or maybe even substantially different than the angle at which I was coming. But we would always move toward the same place, but we would get there more quickly by talking to one another,
Absolutely.
By learning from the approach that the other one was taking.
I remember, too, that even when we had to leave Washington, because you were ordained a year before I was, and when you came down to my ordination in Charlotte, I recall that the night before my ordination, all of our priest friends were there. Remember, we had my mother rented a house on the lake for all of our priest friends, and my dad kind of got us all set up, but not realizing that we had more priest friends than we had beds. And so at some point, getting everyone settled down the night before my ordination, I realized that I had no place to sleep. So I went out to the dock, and I thought I better spend some time in prayer. Tomorrow is the big day. And eventually you came out because you didn't have a place to sleep either. And that conversation that had begun on the rooftop ended up becoming a dock talk. And we got into such an intense conversation about what it meant to offer the Son of God to the Father in terms of the Holy Mass. And it so moved me, our conversation, that I remember the two of us kneeling down there on the dock and just praying and realizing that the sun was coming up at some point. And maybe not the best idea before one's ordination to stay up all night, but it certainly was something that I do not regret.
Well, you have a much better memory than I do. I mean,
maybe you fell asleep on me.
I was probably what you thought was prayer. You might have noticed some snores, but it was in these moments have been just a continuation of our conversation, and and the image of the rooftop is really appropriate, right? I mean, we're looking out in much the same way that shepherds of the church are supposed to look out and to see the lay of the land, see where the challenges are, see where the difficulties are, where the beautiful currents that are emerging, and to look at them in a very smart way, in a way that we're meant to, right? So we go off into seminary. We are studying philosophy and theology and scripture because the average person can't spend that much time doing that type of academic work in the world of the faith. And we're supposed to then take that knowledge, to take that insight, to look out prayerfully and discern what's going on. And so that image from the rooftop has really stuck for us as really what we continue to do, even though we're not always outside on a rooftop.
And all the discussions are the things that fed our catechesis, fed our preaching, etc. And so we had said it to ourselves at one point on that rooftop, someday we might be in a position to spend some time and actually invite other persons into our conversation. That someday we might have a radio show. Back then it was a radio show. Now it's a podcast. And we'll actually invite people to see if they want to come and spend a few moments with us and join our conversation.
To be as fascinated as we are about our own conversation. There may be one of you out there.
That's right.
But we're glad to have you. So I remember at the time I was in an assignment, a pastoral assignment in Northern Virginia. And there was, it was a very affluent parish. I mean, the blue collar worker was the attorney and the physician. Everyone else had, castles in Europe. So it was quite an experience for me. But I was at a reception one time at the church, and I was having a conversation with a person there. And this gentleman was asking me about my education. So I explained about my education in chemistry in undergraduate school and graduate school, and then talked about the philosophy program and then the theology. And, when he added it all up, he looked at me and said, "Why does a priest need to be so educated?" And I remember at that moment being just dumbfounded. Like, I didn't know if I should be insulted. I kind of was insulted, or just baffled by the question. And so I got over the insult pretty quickly. I don't remember what I said at the time, but I ruminated over why I was so baffled by the question. And really it comes down to the fact that, priests are dealing with the intimate worlds of the faithful. We're helping to guide whole lives and souls to make their way through this world to reach eternal life. And if you think that you want to leave that to a person who doesn't have education, then you don't really understand what it is that we're trying to do. And I think that that's what we're trying to do, at least, in this podcast, in this conversation, is to say, hey, we want to follow through with why you sent us off to seminary, to help you see what we can see by virtue of that knowledge and education.
That's right. So what does not just right reason bring to a situation, clear thinking and right reason as best we can, but also then the light of faith, because the light of faith is going to give that much more luminescence to the things around us in the world, and such that you see things with greater clarity. If you take a painting, for example, in a dark room, you're not going to necessarily notice all the fine lines and even its imperfections, but if you bring it out into the sunlight, you're going to see what the artist was really up to. And that's kind of what we want to do, is to be able to see things not just with right reason, but also with the light of faith, to manifest to you the brushstrokes, as you will, of the artist who is the provident artist of all of time and history. So that notion of the rooftop, not only because we actually happen to be doing it in Washington.
That was rather serendipitous.
And the text of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 10, 27, where our Lord says, what you've heard whispered, speak from the rooftops. That is to say, the gospel. And so our intent is simply to take things as they come and look as a shepherd would look from a height, trying to see from the watchtower of both faith and reason as we encounter things in the world, and hopefully it would be of some benefit to you, the musings and ruminations that we have and conclusions that we draw.
That really is one of the roles of the shepherd. When we look at the Old Testament, which really fleshes out what we believe in the New Testament to be the role of a shepherd. We talk about the role of priest, prophet, and king. And together, those biblical terms form the concept of shepherd. The priestly sanctifying role, the kingly governing, leading role, and then the prophetic, which is that teaching role. And all together forms an image of shepherd that Christ fills as the good shepherd. And subsequently, every bishop and everyone who has care of souls, priests, follows in that pattern of being a shepherd. And so it's a really important, I think, incredibly important part of fulfilling the role of shepherd is taking the moment to go up at a height and to look around and see what we're all, what the context is, what we're all up against, what the world is, what the lay of the land is, the moment in time in history. I mean, I think what the Second Vatican Council talked about, reading the signs of the times. In many ways, it's similar. But it's not just about catching a few high thoughts or currents, but actually really looking at the circumstances and considering God in that context, considering people in their real life circumstances in that context, and then the world around us, and what challenges we're facing, and what beautiful opportunities and the situations that we're finding ourselves in that maybe we never really found ourselves in before, or maybe they're just rehashing things of history that are playing out yet again, but with slightly different colors and hues.
Yeah, and it's the nature of current milieu to move so quickly from one context into another, the same way a commercial or a film clip would move from frame to frame so fast. And so what we want to be able to do is, to some degree, a bit of a freeze frame, and to be able to examine something in a little bit of a depth, as opposed to it just passing us by. We've heard these words before, we've heard this text before, this gospel passage relative to the thing that's going on in the world. We want to pause in this podcast a little bit and slow down for the purposes of seeing things anew. The same reason, the same faith, but looking at it freshly, if you will, and to do so with the things that are coming at us that perhaps we haven't experienced before, but asking the real questions about what does the faith and reason say about this relative to God, the world, people, situations, etc. G.K. Chesterton once said that to look at something for the 1,001th time, you tend to look at it as it were for the first time. So that's what we're going to do.
He was brilliant.
He was brilliant. Always popping things on their heads and looking at them upside down.
Even just the concept of a color, right? You know, just the idea of a color, and he'd have you look at colors differently. He was just so brilliant at doing that. And there's so much to be gained. For it, or rather from it. So, all right, well, spinning off then on our primary purpose of kind of taking a look out from the parapet, or from the what did you call it? The tower.
The tower.
From the tower.
Ezekiel's watchtower, we'll call it.
Or Ezekiel's watchtower. We're looking at it from the rooftop tower. It's kind of looking at things. And right now, the most glaring thing happening in the world is this conflict in Eastern Europe, where you have Putin leading Russia into an invasion into the Ukraine. Now, at this moment, we have no idea how any of this is going to resolve. We certainly have an appreciation for the geopolitical drama that's unfolding. But, I have been struck from my perspective, not just looking at the context as a historical moment, but looking at it from the perspective of what's going on with God in this moment, what's going on with people in their hearts in this moment. And I can't help but to come to two different things that are going on in me internally. One is my mind goes back to Fatima. I just have this sense of maybe something is unfolding that's related there. Because, as you know, she asked through the children, as she appeared, Our Lady of Fatima in 1917, to these children to have people pray for the conversion of Russia. And we've seen so much happen in John Paul II's pontificate, and the fall and the collapse of the former Soviet Union and the immersion of the country of Russia. And now we find it ourselves as kind of a new chapter, but it's still all unfolding. And so I wonder to what degree all this is related to the events of Fatima and Our Lady's asking for prayers, as we now ask all of our parishes and churches to pray for this situation between the Russia and Ukraine. And then secondly, I think of how dangerous ideologues are. Like I look at a leader, like Putin, and I think to myself, is this man an ideologue? Because ideologues are, I think they're fundamentally dangerous, and of course it's not just a problem for world leaders; it's a real problem for people in general. To become an ideologue is I think a real disaster for a person in their life to follow that path. But I don't. Do you have any thoughts about either of those things?
Just a couple. I mean, firstly, I'm surprised that there's been such a connection with Fatima, because I frankly didn't think about it myself, because I didn't really think about Russia being converted in any way, shape, or form by Putin invading Ukraine, or his work in Belarus or his work in other areas, obviously it's got to be connected somehow. But I've had so many texts from people asking me that question. Father, is this
right?
it? And so there is some sense among the faithful, I'm ashamed to say it wasn't among me, that there might be something going on here. And I don't know. I do recall growing up as a kid saying the rosary in our parish, and we always said these prayers at the end of the rosary when the parish was saying the rosary commonly for the conversion of Russia.
Yep.
And I remember thinking to myself, what is Russia? Because I had no idea. I was a kid. I probably came closest to understanding at least the American image of Russia by watching Rocky IV or something. It's where I learned
or Red Dawn.
It's where I learned who the players were, exactly. But I had no idea back then. But it did strike me as the fact that the whole church is praying for the conversion of one place. And obviously that can't be for nothing. But why Putin? Why this time period? And as far as ideologues go, I mean, how would we define an ideologue? I mean, I suppose one could say that someone who thinks very myopically through one particular idea, has a dialogue with himself, and is intent on fulfilling the end that he has in mind, and there is nothing else that's going to interfere with that. But I suppose it could also be the case that we encounter ideologues relative to persons who just sort of outsource their own thinking. In other words, you don't want to think through things or make distinctions, and so the temptation can usually be to choose your teachers, which we all do on some level, but then to choose them and then just have them do all your thinking for you.
Right. Well, I think when I think of an ideologue, I think of someone who has a particular view, as you say, a certain idea, and it is fundamentally true. And therefore, in one's mind, right? It doesn't. The problem is when it's not actually true or only partly true. But to them, it's just fundamentally true. And any information that comes in that suggests the contrary is somehow wrong. So this thought or this idea is impervious to new information or correction.
Right.
That's really dangerous.
Absolutely. I mean, it lacks all nuance and distinction. St. Thomas Aquinas loves to, the Dominicans love to say, you seldom affirm, you never deny, but you always distinguish. And that means that anyone with whom you're having contact, you walk through, like we're doing from the rooftop. The whole point in us doing this is we found that we could climb a little bit higher with two minds than with one. Because really with one mind, you're having a dialogue with yourself. And so you're sort of answering yourself the entire time, which is kind of another idea of an ideologue. Because there's no one to push back against your mind. And so you can keep talking to yourself all you want and affirming your own ideas. And the other thing that I tend to find with that temptation to ideology in that sense is that even if new information comes, you simply shoehorn it into the idea that you already have. So even if you accept it, it becomes part of the under the umbrella of the one idea that you have, the man of one idea.
That's right. You make it fit.
You make it fit.
You make it fit. You shoehorn it. In a certain sense, I've fallen prey.
We all have them. Sure.
But I'm going to take it, into sort of a silly, non-significant realm. But you know, I like metaphors and analogies, and so I'll come up with an image of something, and I'll say it's like this, and I'll draw some real parallels. But at some point, you recognize I cross a line, and I start forcing parallels or drawing, inferences that maybe aren't real, and so I go too far. In a certain sense, I'm, in this small way, I'm using this metaphor, which is always going to have some degree of similarity and a great deal of dissimilarity, and I can blur the lines because I'm so enamored with the similarity that I'm not quick to stop at the dissimilarity.
Yes.
And so I can become a small version of an ideologue relative to that image. But it is a problem. It's not just for geopolitical figures leading nations into conflict. It's me. I mean, we all have this drama with ideology. I mean, how often do we, have we had conversations, whether it's someone who is coming from a totally different faith or a totally different worldview, and you take an issue that people have strong opinions about, whether it's a pro-life, right, abortion, you can't talk to them, right? Because there's this ideology that's usually manifest in a bunch of slogans that it's impenetrable.
It's impenetrable. And that's not a problem of mind. That's a problem of will. And this is the difficulty with any of us when we become ideologues. Because there's one thing to teasing out an analogy and attempting to get from the analogy every possible drop.
Right. And I'm guilty. I'm the worst. I need you there to tell me when I've crossed over a line.
Yeah, but you're the master of images. So it's helpful because you do come up with analogies that are extremely acute and penetrating. And very helpful to understand, to bridge from the abstract to the sort of the concrete. But as we say, all analogies limp, and when the limping happens, you got to switch it to another analogy or what have you, or some other kind of ratiocination to get more out of this topic. But nevertheless, it just seems to me that every time we sort of bunker down in the slogans or the cliches or the camps, what we're ultimately doing is putting the covers over our head, and that's just a matter of will, because the mind doesn't have the problem. Right? The mind doesn't have the problem looking at something and seeing the truth. It wants that. It naturally gravitates toward that, and it shines light on things. It wants to know. Whereas the will, I want what I have embraced. And I don't want things to the contrary, because it will mean a decoupling and an embracing of something else.
You don't want to be wrong.
I don't want to be wrong.
I want this to be true.
Yeah.
So I need to say that if you hear heavy breathing, it's not me. We have two Great Danes that are here in the room. They're the seminary dogs. They're enormous. But they think they're lap dogs. But when they sleep, they tend to be as loud as any one of us.
They're not ideologues.
They're definitely not ideologues. There we go. But I don't want anyone to hear those sounds and think, "Oh, is Father Winslow falling asleep?"
Well, I was talking too long there.
Do you remember that time? But, okay, so we were. What you need to know is we had the blessed experience of having a couple years overlap at a parish. And we had a lot of fun with that because we were longtime friends. Obviously, we met in the seminary, and we, became priests within 1 year of each other, and then we really began our priestly life at the same time. So to have this opportunity, some 15 years, maybe 12 years later, to land in the same parish, working with the same people, was really a blessed moment. So we had this familiarity, we had this banter, and from the pulpit, we would occasionally, rip on each other. It was sort of, in fact, the people loved it. I mean, it was a lot of fun. It would go this sort of banter back and forth. I would, say things. All right, how long did Father Kauth, bore you last week? I mean, I'm sure it was incredibly tedious and boring, and probably misinformed you with half of the things you learned, and I could do in half the time. Just simple like jabs and jokes, and people, they loved it. They went on with it, and one time there was we had visitors for Christmas, and I got a letter in the mail to me as a pastor that was very upset and defensive of you, saying that he had never been to a parish where one priest spoke so harshly and meanly about another. And I was thinking to myself, how could you not understand it? But the whole room laughed. I mean, I'm funny. I'm funny. And that was funny. And these people laughed. And I don't know.
We found a common.
Maybe you couldn't hear the laughter.
A common punching bag when Father Christian arrived. So
yeah.
we both.
Well, that was easy
because it was
huge
easy.
target,
big target. Preached way too long.
Way too long.
So he was fun. He was fun to.
Oh my heavens! Well, that's true. That was a nice foil. But yeah, so there's occasional banter. How did I get off on that?
We're talking about falling asleep with the dog.
Oh, yeah. So it's not beyond me to fall asleep while Father Kauth talks and then make fun of it.
It was usually the opposite, though, because when I was at the parish with you, I had the high school as a chaplaincy, and then I taught at the Abbey, and then we were starting the seminary project, and so I was shifting gears too much, and by the time I finally got home, you were kind of ready to go and to have conversation, and I was becoming an old man, so I would pretend to listen after a certain point, and you'd be talking and like, Kauth, are you listening to me?
You never were. And those recliners, they didn't help.
Yeah, the problem is recliners are from the devil,
so close to
and it wasn't
bed.
Exactly the rooftop.
That's true.
We needed some cold air.
Yeah,
and
that was too easy to fall asleep. Yep, that's the way it went.
Well, so, I mean, I suppose to get back to the initial topic, I suppose what we're speaking about here relative to ideology then is that sort of intellectual humility that we have to possess. That I want to hear someone else. I want to understand them. And of course, it doesn't mean that we don't make distinctions, or we don't bring in the faith, or we don't disagree, or as if everything, once we understand each other, is going to be somehow a happy marriage. On the contrary, it may not be, but persons can always be received, even if the thing that they hold is not received.
Yeah,
that's hard though. That takes an awful lot.
You really have to hone that intellectual landscape that we're constantly assembling.
Yeah,
we're constantly altering, or should be anyway, taking in new information and adjusting so we have a sharper parallel with reality.
Absolutely.
But if there's something about our intellectual landscape that we protect because we don't want it to be otherwise, it's where I live, it means too much to me, then I think that's where we really run into this problem with ideology. And then any new information that threatens that aspect of our intellectual landscape is opposed. And you can't possibly make distinctions because something might be threatened around the chopping block. And so that's a real problem. And I think, again, I go back, it's not just for geopolitical leaders in any given moment in history that lead to wars or conflicts. This is problem everyday stuff. I mean, I'm sure people experience this at work or in their neighborhoods, in their families. I mean, I warn my parishioners every Thanksgiving and every Christmas, look at, try to avoid the contentious topics.
Coming.
Yep. If somebody tries to bait you into some unpleasant conversation, it's not the day. Enjoy the family.
Yeah, and this is where the faith...
Do it another day. Do it tomorrow.
Where the faith can so set you free, right? Because if you're talking... Thanksgiving table may not be the case if somebody don't hold the faith. But if you're talking about one of the doctrines of the faith that are always terribly paradoxical with other things you experience in life, like you have to hold this A and you have to hold this B in some kind of tension because the resolution of those two seemingly things that are contradictory find their resolution in something that is beyond your understanding. So a mystery being that sort of incomprehensible certitude. So it sets you free to be able to talk about these things because you're certain about what God has revealed. And yet I have no idea, once I hold that truth, all the aspects of that thing. I mean, it shines a light into the entire, if you will, the entire landscape of reality. And I can't see very far in it. So to be able to explore with someone, having that truth that has been revealed as the ground that keeps us foundational in our thinking, I don't have to fight over the territory. I don't have to fight over the ground that I'm standing on. That comes with revelation.
Right. And
then once I'm standing there, we can actually have a conversation about what does it mean to be three persons.
Well, and that's it. So you have to surrender the temptation to be an ideologue.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. If other people's problems are not your problems, then you don't want to have to deal with them.
Sure.
And so you keep your world narrow and say the Catholic faith fits very perfectly. Okay, all right, that's fine. But if for some reason in your family or in your workplace, there are these other arenas that you don't deal with that start to now spill into your world, do you just defend your comfortable space and come at it like an ideologue? It's a real temptation because you just come at it and say, no, this is wrong, this is right. Okay, you shouldn't dismiss what we believe to be right and wrong, but I don't think that you take the posture of an ideologue. I think it's the wrong way because one, your perspective will never ever grow. The intellectual landscape will never sharpen and grow. And also, it's from the other side of the equation. Somebody with whom you're having a conversation, if they do the same thing, then you're just fighting.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no meaningful exchange. Right. There's no distinctions that are being made for the purpose of helping each other learn more. And I'm quite honest, I think I could have a conversation with just about anybody from an ideological position not from a worldview, I should say, not an ideological position, but a worldview that is totally contrary to my own. And I think I can learn something. Yeah, I mean, did you used to say this about St. Thomas Aquinas?
That's it. One of the reasons I so gravitated to him, because he truth was wherever he could find it, right? And would assemble that into his magnum opus, in the sense that this person said this, and maybe they should have made this distinction, but that is true what they said. And over assembling, as it were, the summa of everything he had learned. But didn't think that he would stop
because he was critiquing. I mean, bringing Aristotle,
very contrary
to be brought in
to the milieu at the time
to a Christian mind. I mean, he was secular, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, that's the way it was perceived.
You know, if we were to go back before we close up here to the original question, it intrigues me. We're talking about ideologues and intellectual humility and Fatima. The fact that Fatima warned about the errors, as it were, of Russia and communism, etc., and didn't warn the geopolitical figures. Like she warned 3 kids.
That's right.
Right. And so when we feel sort of incredibly small in the face of these momentous world events, and how do I understand what Putin is doing, what Ukraine is rebelling against, and as if still being an ideologue, you can't obviously place this side is perfectly good and this side is perfectly evil. I mean, it's so complicated.
Yeah.
And to make a caricature out of that from my own ideological position.
Right.
But going back to Fatima, that perhaps there's going to be a bit of a humbling effect between these two at present warring factions, whether it's Russia and the entirety of NATO, I don't know. But ultimately, she didn't give the ground plan to the generals.
That's
she
right.
She gave it to 3 shepherd kids.
Who then, in turn, was told to spread the message to the masses. Yeah. I mean, to the rank and file people. And it's truly, truly extraordinary because, you know, I think right now, and again, obviously in this moment in time, we have no idea how this is going to unfold. We listen back a year from now, and we'll have a better sense of how things will have unfolded. But at this moment in time, I know that there are people that have been assembling in Russia to speak out against this incursion. And something in me tells me that this type of change has to happen from the bottom up. It has to happen from the people. And I do wonder if all of those prayers to pray for the conversion of Russia was really about praying for the conversion of heart of the people to see the truth of the truth of their situation, the truth of what leaders are doing with respect to propaganda, with respect to ideology, and to say no, and to maybe stop it. Because honestly, if he doesn't have the backs of the Russian people to stand on, then this all stops. He falls down, and this tense moment dissolves. And so that's I don't know how it's all going to play out, but it does seem to me that just as Our Lady spoke to 3 children, who then in turn spoke to the rank and file people of the world, that it seems to me that probably the answer lies right now in the rank and file people of Russia, and how this thing will unfold. And maybe this was part of the spiritual fortification over the course of a century to prepare for what happened with respect to the late 80s, the role of John Paul II and the fall of the Iron Curtain, the conversion of Russia from the communist state to now finding its last gasps, hopefully, maybe, I don't know.
Please God.
Yeah. And
well, for our purposes, the answer is the same as what Our Lady gave, right? In terms of penance, and the Holy Rosary.
The Rosary.
So we have much to pray for.
Without doubt. I mean, the Rosary is a mystical weapon, the effect of which exceeds the sum of its parts.
Amen. But at some point, we have to talk about why Francisco was going to do any purgatorial time.
Well,
I got to know something about that.
I'm with you. That's a little terrifying.
We'll put that one for another.
Yeah, for people who don't know, that the little boy Francisco, the visionary, was told that he wouldn't go to heaven right away,
unless he did many rosaries.
Unless he did many rosaries, and what was he, 9? Something like that.
Explore that one in a different episode.
Yeah, it's a little bit terrifying when you look into that.
I'm coming down from the rooftop right now.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get too real.
Very good. Good. Well, great to see you.
All right, we'll see what we talk about next.
Makes me wanna scream from the rooftop to the screen.
Thanks for listening to this episode of From the Rooftop.
For updates about new episodes, special guests, and exclusive deals for From the Rooftop listeners, sign up at rooftoppodcast.com.
And remember, for more great ways to deepen your faith, check out all the spiritual resources available at 10books.com.
And we'll see you again next time.
From the Rooftop.